Welcome to ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where human civilization first learned to live in cities, to write, to trade across vast distances. For the next few hours, we will walk the streets of Sumerian cities in the 3rd millennium BCE, experiencing the bustling markets where farmers and fishermen, craftsmen and merchants, slaves and free citizens gather to exchange goods and gossip, to make their living in one of the world's first urban civilizations. If you enjoy these immersive journeys into the ancient world, please like and subscribe to support our channel. It is dawn in the city of sometime around 2400 BCE, during the height of Sumerian civilization. The city sits on the banks of the Euphrates River, its massive mud brick walls enclosing perhaps 65,000 people, its great ziggurat, a stepped pyramid temple, dominating the skyline, visible for miles across the flat Mesopotamian plain. Is one of the great cities of Sumer, a major center of trade, home to wealthy merchants and powerful priests, to craftsmen and scribes, to laborers and slaves. Our story begins at a river quay, where boats are already arriving as the first light of dawn breaks across the water. The Euphrates is the city's lifeline, the highway that connects to other cities upriver and to the Persian Gulf downstream. Boats bring goods from across Mesopotamia and beyond, timber from the mountains to the north, copper from Dilmun, modern Bahrain, fish from the marshes, grain from agricultural estates along the river. Nasir is a boatman in his 30s, the owner of a small reed boat that he uses to transport goods and passengers between and the villages and estates within a day's journey of the city. His boat is traditional Mesopotamian design, a frame of reeds bundled and lashed together, coated with bitumen to waterproof it, capable of carrying perhaps half a ton of cargo, plus himself and 1 or 2 passengers. It is not a large boat, but it is his livelihood, his independence, his path to making a living without being bound to any master. This morning, Nasir has brought a cargo of fresh fish from the marshes to the south, where the Euphrates spreads into a vast wetland before reaching the sea. The marshes are rich with fish and waterfowl, and marsh dwellers make their living by catching these and selling them to city folk who cannot fish for themselves. Nasir acts as the middleman, traveling to marsh villages, purchasing fish, transporting them to markets, and selling them at a profit. He ties his boat at the quay and begins unloading his cargo. The fish are packed in baskets lined with wet reeds to keep them moist. They are not fresh in the modern sense. There is no ice, no refrigeration, but they were alive yesterday, were caught during the night, and if sold and cooked today, they will be acceptable. Tomorrow they will start to spoil, so there is urgency to the work. Around Nasir, other boats are unloading their own cargoes. A larger boat, a proper wooden vessel, expensive, owned by a wealthy merchant, is unloading sacks of grain. Another boat carries date palm logs that will be used in construction. A third has jars of date wine, produced at an estate upriver. The quay is a scene of controlled chaos, boat owners shouting to porters, merchants inspecting goods, scribes tallying loads for tax purposes, guards keeping order and watching for theft. The river port is managed by the Temple of Nana, the moon god who is patron deity. The temple owns much of the land around the city, employs thousands of people, and controls much of commerce. Boats using the quay must pay fees to the temple, calculated as a percentage of the value of goods being landed. In return, the temple maintains the quay, provides some security, and keeps records of trade that can be used to settle disputes. A temple scribe approaches Nasir, clay tablet and stylus in hand. The scribe's name is Namu, and he is a young man, perhaps 20, recently trained in the scribal school, assigned to the quay to record arriving shipments. Scribes are the literate elite of Sumerian society. Relatively few people can read and write, and those who can enjoy status and employment opportunities denied to the illiterate. Namu examines Nasir's cargo, counts the baskets of fish, makes notes on his clay tablet using the wedge-shaped cuneiform script. The tablet is soft clay that will later be dried in the sun or baked in an oven, creating a permanent record. The text is in Sumerian, written in the cuneiform system that uses hundreds of different symbols representing syllables, words, and concepts. The scribe calculates the tax owed, 1 basket of fish out of every 10, which Nasir must surrender to the temple. This is not negotiable, not a matter for bargaining. The temple's authority in is absolute, backed by religious tradition, by the city's government, and ultimately by force if necessary.
Enlil Nasir accepts the tax without complaint. It is the price of doing business, the fee that allows him to use the city's infrastructure.
With the tax paid, Enlil Nasir is free to take his remaining fish to market. He shoulders several baskets and makes his way from the quay, through the narrow streets, toward the central marketplace. The streets are already busy despite the early hour. Is a city that wakes with the sun, that must do much of its work in the morning cool, before the desert heat becomes unbearable. The houses he passes are mostly single-story mud brick structures, built wall to wall along winding streets barely wide enough for two people to pass. The houses have no windows on the street side. Privacy is valued, and security concerns dictate that houses face inward, around private courtyards, presenting only blank walls to the street. The effect is claustrophobic by modern standards, but it is normal for residents, who have never known any other kind of urban design. As Enlil Nasir walks, he encounters other people heading toward the market. A farmer drives a donkey loaded with vegetables, onions, garlic, lentils, cucumber, grown on his plot outside the city walls. A potter carries clay vessels carefully balanced in a basket on his shoulder. A weaver leads a donkey cart loaded with bolts of cloth. A woman balances a jar of butter on her head, her hands free, her posture erect, moving with practiced ease. The marketplace is located in a large open square near the city center, not far from the Great Ziggurat. It is not a building but an open space, and the market is wherever sellers choose to set up their goods. Some merchants have regular spots that they occupy every market day. Seniority and reputation grant them the best locations. Others must take whatever space they can find, setting up their goods on mats or in baskets, hoping to attract customers. Enlil Nasir finds a spot on the edge of the square, not the best location but acceptable. He spreads a reed mat and arranges his baskets of fish, calling out to potential customers. Fresh fish from the marshes, carp and mullet, caught last night, best price. Other sellers are making their own calls, creating a din of competing voices. Dates, sweet dates from my own trees, wool cloth, finest quality, pottery, all sizes, onions, garlic, fresh vegetables. The noise is constant, overwhelming, the signature sound of a Mesopotamian market. The first customers arrive, housewives sent by their families to purchase food for the day's meals. Servants from wealthy households buying provisions, cooks from taverns seeking ingredients. They move from seller to seller, comparing quality and prices, haggling over every transaction. A woman approaches Enlil Nasir's mat, examines his fish critically. She is middle-aged, dressed in a simple woolen wrap, clearly not wealthy but not destitute either, probably the wife of a craftsman or minor official, managing a modest household budget. She picks up a fish, smells it, checks the eyes and gills with practiced expertise. How much? She asks. 2 shekels of silver for this basket, Enlil Nasir replies. She snorts. 2 shekels, for fish that will be spoiled by noon. I will give you 1 shekel. This is the opening of a negotiation that both parties understand and expect. Enlil Nasir counters, she counters, they move gradually toward a price they can both accept. The final price is 1.5 shekels, halfway between their opening decisions, which is typical of how such negotiations end. But there is a complication. The woman does not have silver. Few ordinary people do. Silver is the standard of value in Mesopotamia, the medium in which prices are quoted and debts are calculated, but actual silver coins are rare. Instead, most transactions involve barter or payment in goods that can be converted to silver equivalent value. The woman offers payment in barley, the staple grain of Mesopotamia, used not just for food, but as a form of currency. She will give Enlil Nasir a measure of barley equivalent in value to 1.5 shekels of silver. Enlil Nasir accepts this. Barley is universally acceptable, easily stored, and he can use it himself or trade it for other goods. The transaction is completed without any written record. This is a small, ordinary sale, beneath the notice of scribes and record keepers. Only larger transactions, loans, land sales, and temple business are recorded in writing. The vast majority of daily commerce happens through oral agreements, personal trust, and the social pressure to maintain one's reputation for honest dealing. As the morning progresses, Enlil Nasir sells more fish, sometimes for barley, sometimes for other goods, a bolt of cloth, a jar of oil, a copper tool. He does not insist on any particular form of payment. He accepts whatever he can use or trade, constantly calculating rough equivalences, trying to end the day with goods worth more than his initial investment. By mid-morning, most of his fish are sold. The few remaining are looking less fresh, and he will have to lower his prices or accept that they will spoil. This is the constant pressure of dealing in perishable goods. You cannot wait for the perfect price, cannot hold out indefinitely. You must sell while you can, accept what the market offers, and hope that your costs and profits balance in your favor. Around him, the marketplace is at peak activity. The square is crowded with sellers and buyers, the air thick with voices, with the smells of food and spices and humanity, with the heat that is building as the sun climbs higher. This is the economic heart of where the city's production and consumption meet, where farmers and fishermen and craftsmen bring what they have made or grown, where city dwellers come to purchase what they need. But the market is more than just economic exchange. It is also social space, the place where people gather and interact, where news is shared and gossip spreads, where relationships are formed and maintained. A market is where a farmer from outside the city learns what is happening in the world beyond his village, where a craftsman hears about new techniques or opportunities, where a merchant gathers information that might inform his next trading venture. Near Enlil-Nasir, two men are arguing about politics. The city's ruler, the Ensi, has recently imposed new taxes, and people are unhappy. A group of women discusses a wedding that occurred last week, trading details and opinions. An old man tells anyone who will listen about the flood 20 years ago that nearly destroyed the city, though his listeners have heard this story many times before. A young scribe named Shulgi sits at a small table, offering his services to the illiterate. For a small fee, he will write a letter, draw up a contract, make a record of a debt or a transaction. Business is slow this morning, but he is patient, knowing that as the day progresses, he will find customers. His presence in the market represents the crucial role of literacy in Mesopotamian commerce. Written records make possible the complex credit arrangements, long-term contracts, and large-scale transactions that are increasingly common in Sumerian cities. A commotion breaks out near the center of the square. A merchant is accusing a customer of trying to cheat him, claiming the copper ingot the customer offered in payment is underweight. The customer denies this, insists his copper is good weight. A crowd gathers, interested in the drama, and several men intervene to arbitrate the dispute. They fetch a standard weight from a nearby temple office, test the copper, and determine that the merchant is correct. The copper is indeed light. The customer, embarrassed, either adds copper to make up the weight, or the transaction is cancelled. The crowd disperses, the excitement over. Such disputes are common, and the market has informal mechanisms for resolving them. Serious disputes might go to the city's courts, but most are settled through negotiation, arbitration by respected community members, or simply by one party backing down to preserve their reputation. The market functions not just on trade, but on trust, and anyone who develops a reputation for dishonesty will find themselves excluded from future transactions. As noon approaches and the heat becomes intense, market activity begins to slow. Sellers pack up unsold goods, buyers return to their homes, the square gradually empties. Enlil-Nasir has sold all his fish except for 2 baskets of inferior quality that he will either sell at a steep discount or take home to eat himself. Overall, the morning has been successful. He has traded his fish for a variety of goods that together are worth more than what he paid the marsh fisherman, enough to support himself and to invest in tomorrow's trading. He walks back to the quay, thinking about his next venture. Perhaps tomorrow he will travel upriver, see if there are goods to be bought cheaply in the villages and sold at profit in Or perhaps he will take passengers. There is always demand for transport, and passenger fares can be good on a day when cargo opportunities are scarce. This is the constant calculation of the small-scale trader, always looking for the next opportunity, always trying to stay one step ahead of competition and misfortune.
While Enlil-Nasir plies his trade on the river and in the marketplace, let us turn our attention to a different part of Ur's economy. The vast workshops operated by the Temple of Nana, where hundreds of workers produce goods ranging from textiles to bread, from beer to pottery, all under the supervision of the temple administration. The Temple of Nana is not merely a religious institution, but an economic powerhouse. It owns extensive lands worked by dependent laborers and tenants. It operates workshops that produce goods for the temple's own use, for trade, and for sale. It makes loans to merchants and farmers,
It stores grain and other goods that serve as social insurance for the city. The temple is, in effect, a combination of church, bank, warehouse, and manufacturing center. And it employs or controls the labor of perhaps a quarter of Ur's population. Nin Shuba is a weaver in the temple's textile workshop, one of perhaps 100 women who spend their days spinning thread and weaving cloth. She is in her 20s, the daughter of a small farmer who died in debt to the temple, and she was given to the temple as a child to work off that debt. This makes her status somewhere between free and slave. She is not free to leave, she must work as directed, but she receives rations of food and cloth. She is not bought and sold as a slave would be, and theoretically, if the debt is ever repaid, she could be free. The textile workshop is a large courtyard surrounded by rooms where different stages of textile production take place. In one room, women card wool, combing it to align the fibers. In another, they spin the wool into thread using simple drop spindles, wooden shafts weighted at the bottom, spun by hand to twist the fibers into yarn. In a third room, weavers sit at looms, working thread into cloth. Nin Shuba works at a vertical loom, a large frame with weights hanging from the bottom to keep the vertical threads, the warp, taut. She weaves the horizontal threads, the weft, through the warp, building up the fabric gradually, row by row. The work is repetitive, tedious, hard on the back and hands, but Nin Shuba has been doing it for years, and her movements are automatic, her fingers flying through the familiar motions. The cloth she is weaving is plain, undyed wool, the kind of basic textile used for everyday clothing by ordinary people. This is the bulk of the temple's textile production, though they also produce finer cloths, dyed in various colors, decorated with patterns, used for the clothing of priests and wealthy citizens, or for trade. The workshop is supervised by an overseer named Enlil, a middle-aged man who himself was once a temple dependent, but has risen through ability and loyalty to a position of minor authority. He walks through the workshop, checking the quality of work, noting how much each weaver has produced, making sure there is no slacking or waste. He carries a clay tablet on which he records daily production figures that will be reported to higher temple officials. The workers receive rations rather than wages, fixed amounts of barley, oil, and wool, allocated according to their status and the type of work they do. A weaver like Nin Shuba receives a modest ration, enough to keep herself fed and clothed, but nothing more. A skilled craftsman working in the temple's metalworking shop receives more. A laborer doing simple unskilled work receives less. Children receive half rations. The system is not generous, but it is reliable. As long as you work as directed, you will not starve. This ration system represents a fundamentally different economic organization than the market exchange we saw with Enlil Nasir. The temple economy is a redistributive system. Goods flow into the temple from its lands and workshops, are stored in temple warehouses, and are redistributed to temple workers and dependents according to fixed formulas. This is not a market economy based on prices and voluntary exchange, but a command economy based on administrative allocation. At midday, the weavers break for their meal, bread and onions, with a small amount of oil and some weak beer. The meal is eaten in the courtyard, and the women talk quietly among themselves. Nin Shuba sits with her friend Gemi Enlil, a woman of similar age and status, and they discuss their lives, their work, their hopes. My brother visited yesterday, Gemi Enlil says. He says the harvest was good on his plot. He might be able to pay off some of his debt to the temple. Perhaps in a few years. She trails off, but Nin Shuba understands. If Gemi Enlil's family can pay off their debt, she might be released from temple service, might become free to marry, to have her own household, to live as she chooses. But this is a distant dream. Debts are easily accumulated, hard to repay, and the temple is in no hurry to release productive workers. I had a different dream, Nin Shuba says quietly. I dreamed I was at the marketplace, with silver to spend, buying whatever I wanted. I wore fine cloth, dyed red. People treated me with respect. Gemi Enlil smiles sadly. We all have that dream, but dreams are not life. The conversation shifts to more immediate concerns. Gossip about other workers, complaints about the overseer's harshness, speculation about whether the temple will issue extra rations for the upcoming festival of Nana. Their world is narrow, confined to the temple precinct and the workers' quarters. But within that narrow world, they find meaning, friendship, small pleasures. After the meal, work resumes and continues through the afternoon. Nin Shuba weaves steadily, her loom gradually filling with cloth. By the end of the day, she has completed perhaps 2 meters of fabric, a solid day's work.
Enough to satisfy the overseer, though not so much as to earn praise or additional rations.
As evening approaches and the light begins to fail, there are no lamps or torches in the workshop. Work is done by daylight only. The overseer calls the workers to stop. The looms are left as they are, to be resumed tomorrow. Ninshuba and the other weavers file out of the workshop and make their way to the workers' quarters, a cluster of small mud brick houses where temple dependents live. Ninshuba shares a single room with 3 other women. The room is bare, sleeping mats on the floor, a few personal possessions, a lamp, little else. This is home, though it is difficult to call it comfortable or pleasant. It is shelter, a place to sleep, and that is all. The evening meal is similar to the midday meal: bread, onions, a bit of fish if they are lucky, beer. The women prepare it together, eating in the small courtyard shared by several houses, talking quietly as the day ends and night falls over Meanwhile, in a different part of the temple complex, a very different kind of work is taking place. Lugal Kisalsi is a temple merchant, a man of substantial status and wealth, who manages trading ventures on behalf of the temple. Unlike the weavers who are bound dependents, Lugal Kisalsi is a free man, a professional who works for the temple by choice and contract, who receives not rations but payment in silver and goods, who has his own household and property. Lugal Kisalsi is in the temple's administrative building, meeting with the temple's chief scribe, a man named Enlil Kiag, who oversees much of the temple's economic operations. They are planning a major trading expedition, a caravan that will travel north to Assur, carrying Ur's textiles and metalwork, returning with timber, copper, and tin that Mesopotamia lacks and must import. The expedition represents a substantial investment. The goods being sent are worth hundreds of shekels of silver, the costs of transport and security will be considerable, and the risks of loss through accident, theft, or dishonest agents are real. But if successful, the expedition will return goods worth far more than the initial investment, generating profit that will support the temple's operations and fund future ventures. Lugal Kisalsi and Enlil Kiag sit on cushions in a room lit by oil lamps, surrounded by clay tablets recording previous expeditions, contracts, accounts. Enlil Kisalsi reports on his preparations. He has assembled a caravan of 30 donkeys, hired guards, made preliminary arrangements with contacts in Assur who will receive the goods and help arrange sales. Enlil Kiag asks detailed questions. Have the guards been properly vetted? Can the contacts in Assur be trusted? What contingency plans exist if the route proves dangerous or if markets in Assur are unfavorable? The chief scribe has seen many ventures fail through inadequate planning, through overly optimistic assumptions, through simple bad luck. His caution is born of experience. They discuss the contract that will govern the expedition. Lugal Kisalsi will receive a share of the profits, perhaps 1/5 as payment for his services in organizing and managing the venture. The temple provides the capital, assumes most of the risk, but also takes most of the profit. This arrangement is typical of how temple trading operates. Professional merchants act as agents, using their knowledge and contacts to execute ventures on behalf of the institution. The contract will be written on a clay tablet, witnessed by several respected men, and sealed with the temple's seal, a cylinder seal rolled across wet clay, leaving an impression that serves as both signature and proof of authenticity. The contract specifies what goods Lugal Kisalsi is taking, what he is expected to return, what happens if the venture fails, what penalties apply if he is found to have acted dishonestly. After several hours of discussion, the contract is drafted, read aloud, agreed to, and sealed. Lugal Kisalsi will depart in 3 days, and if the gods favor the venture, he will return in perhaps 3 months with goods that will enrich the temple and enhance his own reputation and wealth. This expedition, and dozens of others like it, are how connects to the wider world, how the city acquires the materials it cannot produce locally, how Sumerian textiles and crafts reach distant markets. The temple's role in organizing and financing these ventures reflects its central position in Ur's economy. It has the capital, the organization, and the long-term perspective needed for large-scale trade in ways that individual merchants often lack. But the temple's economic dominance is not absolute. Alongside the temple economy, private enterprise also flourishes. Let us now turn our attention to one such private entrepreneur, a man who operates outside the temple system, who makes his living through his own efforts and capital, and who represents an alternative economic model that exists in tension and cooperation with the temple's redistributive system. Kubao is a smith, a craftsman who works with metal, primarily copper and bronze, creating tools, weapons, and ornaments. Unlike the temple weavers who work on rations, or the temple merchant who works on contract, Kubao is an independent businessman. He owns his own workshop, purchases his own materials, sells his own products, and keeps his profits. His workshop is in a quarter of the city, where many craftsmen have their businesses, a neighborhood of workshops, small factories, storage yards, and the modest houses of craftsmen's families. The workshop is a simple mud brick structure, a workroom with a furnace for heating metal, anvils for hammering, array of hammers and chisels and files, and a small sales room where customers can view finished products and place orders. Kubao employs several workers, 2 apprentices learning the trade, a laborer who works the bellows and handles heavy materials, and occasionally hired workers for special projects. This makes him a man of some substance, not wealthy by the standards of temple officials or major merchants, but comfortable, secure, a respected member of the community. This morning, Kubao is working on an order from a wealthy landowner, a set of bronze tools, an axe, a hoe, a sickle. The customer provided the copper and tin that will be mixed to make bronze, and Kubao's fee is for his labor and skill in transforming the raw metals into finished tools. Bronze making is skilled work, requiring knowledge that comes only from years of practice. The copper and tin must be mixed in the right proportions. Too much tin and the bronze becomes brittle. Too little and it stays too soft. The metal must be heated to the right temperature, hot enough to flow and mix, not so hot that it burns or oxidizes excessively. The casting or forging must be done correctly, pouring into molds for some items, hammering hot metal for others. Kubao has been a smith for over 20 years, learned the trade from his father, who learned from his father. The knowledge is not written down. It exists in his hands, his eyes, his practiced judgment. He knows by the color of the metal when it is hot enough. He knows by the sound of his hammer striking the anvil whether he is shaping the metal directly. He knows by touch and sight when a tool is properly finished, when the edge is sharp enough, when the form is right. His apprentices watch and assist, learning through observation and practice. The younger one, a boy of 12, is mostly doing simple tasks, working the bellows to keep the furnace hot, carrying materials, cleaning up. The older one, aged 16, is learning actual metalwork, hammering copper under Kubao's supervision, making simple items, gradually building skills that will one day make him a smith himself. The work is hot, physically demanding, and sometimes dangerous. Hot tools can burn, hammers can slip and smash fingers, but it is also creative, satisfying, producing items of genuine value and beauty. A well-made bronze tool will last for years, will be valued by its owner, will pass from generation to generation as a family heirloom. As Kubao works, a customer arrives, a farmer from outside the city who needs a copper sickle repaired. The sickle's blade has cracked, making it useless for harvesting grain. Kubao examines the damage, considers whether the sickle can be repaired or must be remade entirely. He determines that repair is possible. He can rivet a small copper plate over the crack, reinforcing the blade. He quotes a price, the equivalent of 2 shekels of silver. The farmer does not have silver, but offers payment in barley. Kubao calculates the rough equivalence and accepts. The repair will take about an hour of work, which for Kubao represents reasonable compensation. The farmer agrees to return tomorrow to collect the repaired sickle. These small repair jobs are the bread and butter of Kubao's business. Large orders like the wealthy landowner's tool set are profitable but irregular. Repairs and small items, knife blades, fish hooks, copper pots, simple ornaments, provide steady income that keeps the workshop operating even when large orders are scarce. At midday, Kubao's wife brings lunch to the workshop, bread, dates, and weak beer. He eats quickly, sitting in the doorway where he can watch the street, resting his back and hands for a few minutes before returning to work. His wife Ning Gao manages their household, raises their 3 children, and also helps with the business by selling small items at the market, keeping accounts of what is owed and owing, and managing the relationships with customers and suppliers that are essential to their livelihood. After lunch, Kubao returns to the wealthy landowner's order, spending the afternoon finishing the bronze hoe. The work is painstaking, shaping the blade, sharpening the edge, creating the socket where the wooden handle will attach, smoothing and finishing the surface. By late afternoon, he is satisfied with the result. The hoe is well made, will serve its owner for years, reflects credit on Kubao's craftsmanship. He sends his younger apprentice to inform the customer that the order is ready for collection. The landowner will come tomorrow, or the next day, will inspect the tools, will pay the agreed price if he is satisfied with the quality. This is a moment of some anxiety for Kubao. Wealthy customers can be demanding, can reject work they consider unsatisfactory, can create problems if they are unhappy. But Kubao is confident in his workmanship, and his reputation for quality makes it likely the customer will be pleased.
As evening approaches, Kubao ends the day's work. The furnace is allowed to cool, tools are cleaned and stored, the workshop is secured against theft. Kubao walks to his house, just a short distance from the workshop, where his wife has prepared the evening meal. The house is modest but comfortable. Several rooms around a central courtyard, better than the temple workers' quarters, not as grand as the houses of the truly wealthy. Kubao sits with his family, his wife, his 3 children, and his elderly mother who lives with them. They eat together, share news of the day, perform the small rituals and routines that bind a family together. This is the life of an independent craftsman in Ur. Not rich, not poor, self-supporting, respectable. Kubao has status in the community, can hold his head up among his neighbors, can provide for his family. His workshop will pass to his eldest son, who is already showing aptitude for the work, who will carry on the family trade into the next generation. But Kubao's independence exists within a larger system that he cannot control. He must purchase copper and tin from merchants who import them from distant sources. He must sell his products in markets where prices fluctuate based on supply and demand. He must deal with temple officials who collect taxes, with city officials who enforce regulations about weights and measures and commercial practices. And the temple is always there, a massive presence that both competes with and supports private enterprise. The temple has its own metal workshops, employs its own smiths, produces goods that compete with what Kubao makes. But the temple also provides market infrastructure, maintains order in the city, stores grain that can be drawn on in years of famine. Kubao's relationship with the temple is complex, sometimes competitor, sometimes customer, sometimes simply the dominant institution that shapes the environment in which he works. This evening, as he sits with his family, Kubao reflects on a visit earlier in the week from a temple official who suggested that Kubao might want to take on some contract work for the temple, producing tools and fittings that the temple needs. The work would be steady, the payment reliable, but it would also bind Kubao more closely to the temple, might limit his ability to take other work, might gradually transform him from independent craftsman to temple contractor. He has not yet decided what to do. The security of temple work is attractive, especially as he ages, and worries about providing for his family. But his independence is precious, the ability to make his own decisions, to choose his own projects, to work at his own pace. The tension between security and independence is one that many in Ur face, and there are no easy answers. Let us now turn our attention to a different sector of Ur's economy. Long-distance trade conducted by private merchants, men who work independently of the temple, who take substantial risks in hopes of substantial profits, and who connect Ur to trading networks that span the ancient world. Nasir is such a merchant, a man in his 40s who has been in the copper trade for 20 years. He travels regularly to Dilmun, the island of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, where he purchases copper ore, transports it to Ur, and sells it to smiths like Kubao and to the temple's metal workshops. This trade is lucrative but risky. The sea voyage to Dilmun is dangerous. Pirates operate in the Gulf. Prices fluctuate based on supply and demand, and a single failed venture can wipe out years of accumulated profit. Nasir's house is in a prosperous neighborhood near the city center. A large house with multiple rooms, storage areas, a guest room for visiting merchants, quarters for several slaves who serve his household. The house reflects his wealth and status, marking him as a successful man, someone of importance in Ur's commercial community. This morning, Nasir is in his office, a room containing clay tablets recording his past transactions, correspondence with trading partners, accounts of debts owed and owing,
contracts governing ongoing ventures. He is reviewing his accounts, planning his next trading expedition, worrying about a customer who has not yet paid for copper purchased months ago. The unpaid debt troubles him. The customer, a temple official named Nani, purchased copper from Ea-Nasir, promising payment in silver within 2 months. 4 months have passed, and despite repeated reminders, Nani has not paid. This is not just frustrating, but dangerous for Ea-Nasir's business. His capital is tied up in this unpaid debt, limiting his ability to finance new ventures. Ea-Nasir is considering legal action, taking his complaint to the city assembly, the body of prominent citizens that adjudicates commercial disputes. But lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain in outcome. Moreover, Nani is a temple official, a man with connections and influence. Challenging him publicly could create powerful enemies, could damage Ea-Nasir's reputation, could lead to retaliation. After consideration, Ea-Nasir decides to try one more personal appeal. He will visit Nani, will bring witnesses to make the meeting formal, will demand payment, or at least a firm commitment to pay within a specific time frame. If this fails, he will consider more drastic measures. But before dealing with Nani, Ea-Nasir must manage other business. He has a visitor, a merchant from Ur's sister city of Lagash, a man named Erningirsu, who is interested in purchasing copper. The two men sit on cushions, drink beer, engage in the ritual courtesies that precede serious negotiation. Erningirsu explains his needs. He wants copper for a temple construction project in Lagash, needs quality ore, needs it delivered within 2 months. He asks what Ea-Nasir can supply, and at what price. Ea-Nasir calculates. He has copper in stock, ore purchased on his last voyage to Dilmun. The quality is good, the quantity sufficient to meet Erningirsu's needs. But what price to quote? Too high, and he loses the sale. Too low, and he sacrifices profit. He must judge not just what the copper is worth, but what Erningirsu is willing and able to pay. After some thought, Ea-Nasir names a price, 20 shekels of silver per talent of copper ore. Erningirsu counters with 15. They negotiate, trade arguments about quality and market conditions, gradually converge on a price of 18 shekels per talent. But pricing is only part of the negotiation. There is also the question of payment terms. Erningirsu does not have silver available immediately. The temple in Lagash will pay, but the payment will come only after the copper is delivered, and the temple's officials verify the quality and quantity. This creates risk for Ea-Nasir. He must deliver copper now, trust that payment will come later, accept the possibility that the temple might dispute the quality, or short the quantity, or simply delay payment. Given his current problems with Nani, Ea-Nasir is wary of extending credit. They discuss various arrangements. Perhaps Erningirsu could provide some payment now, some later. Perhaps he could provide a guarantor, someone of substance who would be liable if the temple fails to pay. Perhaps he could offer goods in partial payment, barley, dates, cloth, that Ea-Nasir could accept at agreed values. After extended discussion, they agree on a compromise. Erningirsu will pay 1/3 of the total in silver immediately. He has this much available from his own funds. The temple will pay the remaining 2/3 within 3 months of delivery. Erningirsu will personally guarantee the payment, putting his own reputation and assets at risk if the temple defaults. The agreement is sealed with a contract. Ea-Nasir calls for his scribe, a literate man he employs to manage his written records. The scribe brings soft clay, forms it into a tablet, and carefully writes out the contract in cuneiform. The text specifies the quantity of copper to be delivered, 10 talents, approximately 300 kilograms. The quality, pure copper ore from Dilmun, not mixed with inferior metals. The price, 18 shekels of silver per talent, 180 shekels total. The payment terms, 60 shekels now, 120 shekels within 3 months. The delivery location and timing. Penalties for non-performance by either party. When the text is complete, both Ea-Nasir and Erningirsu press their cylinder seals into the wet clay, leaving impressions that serve as signatures. 2 witnesses, respected merchants who happen to be present, also seal the tablet, attesting that they witnessed the agreement and can testify to its terms if disputes later arise. The tablet will be sun-dried, creating a permanent record. Ea-Nasir will keep 1 copy, Erningirsu will take another. If disputes arise, the tablets can be produced as evidence of what was agreed. With the contract sealed, Erningirsu pays the initial 60 shekels. He does not hand over actual silver coins. Coinage in the modern sense does not exist yet in Mesopotamia. Instead, he provides silver in the form of small ingots or rings, weighed on a balance scale to verify the amount. Nasir checks the weight carefully, using standard weights that are periodically verified against temple weights to ensure accuracy. Weights and measures are critical to commercial trust. If merchants cannot rely on standard measures, if everyone uses different weights or disputes quantities, trade becomes impossible. The silver accepted, Nasir will arrange to deliver the copper to Lagash within 2 weeks. This requires organizing transport, hiring boats to carry the ore down the river, arranging guards to prevent theft, ensuring the cargo is properly packed to prevent loss or damage. The meeting concluded, Girsu departs, satisfied that he has secured the copper he needs at an acceptable price. Nasir is also satisfied. He has made a sale, has received partial payment immediately, has a contract that should ensure the rest. But he also notes in his mental calculations that his capital is now committed to this venture, that until the final payment arrives, he has less flexibility to pursue other opportunities. The afternoon is spent dealing with other business. Nasir meets with a boat owner to arrange transport. He inspects his copper inventory, verifying quantities and quality. He instructs his slaves to prepare the copper for shipment, to pack it carefully in baskets that will protect it during the journey. And he visits Nani, the temple official who owes him money. The visit is tense. Nani is defensive, makes excuses about temple cash flow problems, promises payment soon, without specifying when. Nasir, backed by 2 witnesses he brought along, is firm. He wants a specific date, wants the commitment in writing, wants some assurance that payment will actually arrive. After extended argument, Nani agrees to pay within 1 month and seals a new tablet specifying this commitment. Nasir is not entirely confident this will actually result in payment, but having a written record with witnesses at least strengthens his position if he needs to take legal action. This episode illustrates one of the key challenges of Mesopotamian trade, the difficulty of enforcing contracts, of ensuring people honor their commitments. Laws exist, courts function, but legal processes are slow and uncertain. Much of commerce depends on reputation and social pressure. A merchant who defaults on debts, who fails to honor contracts, will find himself excluded from future business, will lose the relationships and credit that make trade possible. This informal enforcement is often more effective than formal legal systems, but it is also imperfect, and merchants like Nasir must constantly balance the risks of extending credit against the need to make sales. That evening, Nasir sits in his courtyard, reviewing the day's events. The sale to Girsu was good business. The situation with Nani remains problematic, but perhaps closer to resolution. Overall, his trading operations continue to be profitable, continue to generate the wealth that supports his household and his status in the community. But he is also aware of larger forces that affect his business. The political situation is always uncertain. Sumerian cities are often at war with each other, and wars disrupt trade routes, create dangers for merchants, sometimes result in the confiscation of goods or assets. The kings and temples are constantly maneuvering for advantage, and merchants can find themselves caught in the middle. There are also rumors of new sources of copper being developed, of other merchants establishing competing trade routes. The copper trade that has been so profitable for Nasir might become more competitive, might see declining prices and narrower margins. He must stay informed, must be ready to adapt, must consider whether to diversify into other goods or to double down on copper trade. These are the calculations that occupy his mind as night falls over and he prepares for sleep. The merchant's life is one of constant vigilance, constant calculation, balancing risks and opportunities, trying to stay ahead in a competitive and uncertain world. As the working day ends and evening settles over many of the city's residents make their way to taverns, establishments that serve food and beer, provide entertainment, and function as social centers where people gather to relax, to gossip, to escape the confines of their small houses. The Tavern of Kubatum is a modest establishment in a working-class neighborhood, frequented by laborers, craftsmen, small traders, and others of modest means. Kubatum herself is a widow in her 40s who runs the tavern with help from her 2 daughters. In Sumerian society, tavern keeping is one of the few respectable occupations open to women. Indeed, most tavern keepers are women, and the profession has a somewhat disreputable reputation. associated with prostitution and drunkenness. The respectable taverns like Kubatum's maintain standards and reject customers who become too unruly. The tavern is a large room with low benches and tables, lit by oil lamps that cast flickering light and shadows on the walls. Beer is served in large ceramic jars with long reed straws that allow drinkers to sip the liquid while avoiding the sediment that settles at the bottom. The beer is thick, nutritious, slightly alcoholic, more like liquid bread than modern beer, made from barley that is malted, crushed, mixed with water and dates or herbs, and allowed to ferment. This evening the tavern is busy. Enlil Nasir, the boatman we met this morning, sits with several other boatmen, drinking beer and discussing the day's business. At another table, workers from the temple workshops are complaining about their overseer, whom they consider harsh and unfair. A group of young men are playing a board game, moving pieces across a marked board, gambling small amounts on the outcome. Kubatum moves among the tables, refilling beer jars, bringing bowls of dates and nuts, collecting payment. Payment is usually in barley. Most of her customers do not have silver, and she keeps careful mental accounts of who has paid and who owes her. Into this scene comes a storyteller, an old man named Nama, who makes his living by traveling from tavern to tavern, reciting the old stories and songs that Sumerians love. Tales of the gods, stories of ancient heroes, wisdom sayings, occasionally news of events in other cities. Storytellers are not highly respected. Theirs is a marginal profession, barely above begging, but they are welcome in taverns, where they provide entertainment in exchange for beer and whatever small coins customers might toss their way. Nama stands in the center of the room and begins to chant the story of Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, who sought immortality and learned to accept human mortality. The story is old, familiar to everyone in the room, but familiarity does not diminish its power. Nama chants in the traditional rhythmic style, his voice rising and falling, his hands gesturing to emphasize key moments. The tavern grows quiet as customers listen. This is more than entertainment. This is connection to tradition, to the shared cultural heritage that makes them Sumerians. The story speaks to fundamental human concerns: friendship, loss, the search for meaning, the acceptance of mortality, and its ancient words still resonate in the hearts of these workers and traders and craftsmen. When Nama finishes, there is a moment of silence, then appreciative murmurs and a small shower of coins and barley that customers toss to him. He bows, thanks them, and settles into a corner with a jar of beer that Kubatum provides on credit against his earnings. The conversation in the tavern turns to news and gossip. Someone reports that a caravan from the north was attacked by bandits, that several merchants were killed and goods stolen. This news causes concern among those who travel for their living. The roads are never entirely safe, and periods of increased banditry can seriously disrupt trade. Another customer shares news from a village upriver. Flooding has damaged fields, and the harvest will be poor this year. This too is concerning. Poor harvests mean higher grain prices, which mean harder times for everyone except those who have grain to sell. There is political gossip as well. Someone claims to have heard that the Ensi, the city's ruler, is planning a military campaign against Lagash, Ur's rival city. If true, this could mean higher taxes to pay for the war, conscription of men to serve in the army, disruption of trade with Lagash and cities allied with it. War is always bad for ordinary people, who must do the fighting and dying and paying, while others reap whatever benefits victory might bring. Enlil Nasir listens to all this with the keen attention of a man whose livelihood depends on staying informed. Information is valuable. Knowing which routes are dangerous, which markets are strong, which political developments might create opportunities or threats. The tavern is where such information circulates, where the informal intelligence network of merchants and traders operates. He contributes his own bit of information. He saw a large temple caravan being organized, likely heading north toward Assur. This interests several listeners, who speculate about what goods the temple is sending, what they hope to bring back, whether there might be opportunities to piggyback on the caravan's security, or to trade with the same northern contacts. As the evening progresses and the beer flows, the conversation becomes more relaxed, more personal. Men talk about their families, their hopes, their frustrations. A young craftsman talks about wanting to marry but not having the bride price the woman's family demands. An older laborer complains about his aching back, wonders how many more years he can do heavy work. A widow speaks about the difficulties of supporting her children after her husband's death. These are the ordinary concerns of ordinary people, unchanged across millennia, making a living, supporting a family, dealing with the hardships and disappointments that life brings. In the tavern's warm, smoky atmosphere, with beer loosening tongues and friendships providing comfort, these burdens seem a bit lighter, more bearable. But the tavern is not only for socializing. Business is also conducted here. Deals are made, partnerships are formed. Enlil Nasir, after several jars of beer, finds himself in conversation with a merchant who needs goods transported upriver. They discuss terms, agree on a price, and seal the agreement with a handshake and the purchase of beer for the table. An informal contract, not recorded in writing, but binding nonetheless by the social pressure of witnesses and reputation. As midnight approaches, Kubatun begins to encourage customers to leave. The tavern will not stay open all night. There are laws regulating such things, and she is careful to comply, not wanting to attract the attention of city officials. The customers drift away in small groups, heading to their homes through dark streets, finding their way by moonlight and the faint glow from the occasional oil lamp in a window. Kubatum and her daughters clean up, watch the beer jars, bank the lamps, prepare for the next day. The life of a tavern keeper is hard work, but it provides a living, and Kubatum has managed to support her family and even save a bit of silver since her husband's death 5 years ago. She has status in the neighborhood, is known as honest and fair, has built a business that she can perhaps pass to her daughters. As she prepares for bed, she reflects on the evening's events, the stories and gossip and business that filled her tavern. Tomorrow will bring another day, another crowd of customers, another round of serving beer and listening to stories and facilitating the informal social networks that bind the city together. This is her life, and she is content with it. Not rich, not powerful, but independent, self-supporting, making her own way in the complex world of Sumerian Ur. As we conclude our journey through the markets and streets of ancient Ur, let us reflect on the patterns and systems that structure economic life in this early urban civilization, and consider both what has changed and what remains constant across the millennia that separate their world from ours. The economy of Sumerian Ur is a complex mixture of different systems and relationships. The temple operates a redistributive economy, collecting goods from its lands and workshops, storing them, and redistributing them according to fixed formulas. This is a form of economic organization that we might call primitive communism or state socialism, depending on perspective. Centralized allocation rather than market exchange, rations rather than wages, obligation rather than contract. But alongside the temple economy exists a market economy where private individuals trade freely, where prices fluctuate based on supply and demand, where entrepreneurs like Ea Nasir and craftsmen like Kubao make their livings through voluntary exchange. This market economy is not fully developed in the modern sense. There are no real money as we understand it, limited use of credit, simple commercial practices. But the fundamental logic is there, the basic principle that people can improve their situations by producing goods and trading them for other goods they value more highly. And intertwined with both these systems are relationships of obligation and dependency that are neither market nor redistribution. Families supporting members, patrons protecting clients, masters commanding slaves, debtors serving creditors. These personal relationships structure much of economic life, determining who works for whom, who gets access to resources, who prospers, and who struggles. What we see in Ur is not a single coherent economic system, but a patchwork of different relationships and institutions, each governing different aspects of economic life, sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing, together creating a functioning economy that supports a large urban population. Trade is central to this economy in ways that might not be immediately obvious. Mesopotamia lacks most of the raw materials necessary for civilization beyond the most basic level. There is no stone for building, no metal ores, no quality timber. Clay and reeds are abundant, mud brick architecture is sophisticated, but for tools and weapons, for monumental buildings, for luxury goods, Mesopotamia must trade. This necessity drives the development of long-distance trade networks that connect Mesopotamia to sources of copper in Oman, tin in Afghanistan, timber in Lebanon, gold and precious stones from various sources. These networks require organization, capital, and sophisticated commercial practices. They create opportunities for merchants like Nasir, generate wealth for cities like and ultimately make possible the civilization we call Sumerian. The importance of trade also drives the development of writing. The earliest writing in Mesopotamia is not literature but accounting, records of goods received and distributed, of debts owed and paid, of contracts governing transactions. Writing develops because temple administrators need to track the complex flows of goods through their redistributive system, because merchants need records of their dealings, because credit relationships require documentation that survives beyond the lives of the parties involved. From these humble commercial origins, writing expands to include literature, law, science, history, all the things we associate with literate civilization. But the foundation is economic necessity, the need to record and manage complex economic relationships. Literacy also creates a professional class, scribes like Namu who work at the K, like Shulgi, who offers writing services in the marketplace, like the chief scribe Enlil Kiag, who manages temple operations. These literate men are the bureaucrats and accountants and lawyers of their world, indispensable to the functioning of both temple and market economies. The social stratification of is complex, reflecting the various economic relationships we have observed. At the top are the temple officials and the city's political leadership, the NC and his administrators, the high priests, the major merchants. These are the wealthy and powerful, who own property, command labor, make decisions that affect thousands. Below them are free citizens of various levels, prosperous merchants like Nasir, independent craftsmen like Kubao, small farmers who own their own land, minor officials and scribes, small traders like Enlil Nasir. These people are self-supporting, have some control over their own lives, enjoy legal rights and social respect. Further down are dependent workers, people like Nin Shuba, who are bound to the temple or to private employers, who work for rations rather than wages, who have limited freedom but are not exactly slaves.
At the bottom are actual slaves, people owned as property, bought and sold, with no rights and no freedom. Slavery in Sumerian society is not as extensive or as harsh as it would become in later civilizations like Greece and Rome, but it exists, creating a class of people with no autonomy, no hope of improvement. This hierarchy is not absolutely rigid. People can move up or down depending on luck and circumstances. A clever merchant can become wealthy. A farmer who falls into debt can lose his land and become dependent. A dependent worker whose family pays off their debt can become free. But mobility is limited, and for most people, their social position is determined by birth and inheritance. Gender roles are also complex. Women in Sumerian society have more rights and freedom than women in many later civilizations. They can own property, conduct business, initiate divorce, testify in court. Women like Kubatum, the tavern keeper, and Ningal, the smith's wife, play important economic roles, but they are still subordinate to men in most contexts, and many professions are effectively closed to them. The temple's economic role is particularly interesting from a modern perspective. The temple is simultaneously a religious institution, a government agency, a business corporation, and a social welfare organization. It performs religious rituals, manages public works, operates commercial enterprises, and provides food storage and distribution that functions as insurance against famine. This multiplicity of roles reflects the fact that in Sumerian thinking, these categories are not separate. Religion, government, and economy are not distinct spheres, but different aspects of a unified whole. The temple manages the economy because the city belongs to the god, and the god's wealth must be properly managed. Trade is a religious act as well as an economic one, governed by oaths and divine witnesses. This integration of religion and economy sometimes strikes modern observers as primitive or superstitious, but it serves important functions. Religious oaths add force to commercial contracts in a world where legal enforcement is weak. The temple's economic operations generate surplus that supports religious activities, which in turn provides social cohesion and legitimacy for the economic system. As we have followed various characters through their day in we have seen how their lives interconnect. How Enlil Nasir's fish end up in the kitchens of workers like Nin Shuba, how Kubao's tools are made from copper that Nasir imports, how everyone gathers in Kubatum's tavern to share news and form the social bonds that make commerce possible. This interconnection is the essence of urban civilization. Cities work because people specialize, because farmers and fishermen provide food for craftsmen,
and merchants. Because craftsmen make tools for farmers, because merchants connect the city to distant sources of materials, because all these specialists can trade with each other, creating a division of labor that makes everyone more productive than they could be in isolation. But this interdependence also creates vulnerability. If trade routes are cut, the city cannot get the copper and tin it needs for tools. If harvests fail, people go hungry, despite all their specialized skills. If the redistributive system breaks down, workers who depend on rations face destitution. Urban civilization is productive but fragile, capable of great achievements, but always at risk from disruption. The markets we have explored, the river quay where goods arrive, the central marketplace where farmers and craftsmen sell, Kubao's workshop where production happens, Nasir's trading house where long-distance commerce is organized, Kubatum's tavern where social networks form. These are the nodes of economic activity, the places where the city's economy actually happens, where abstract systems become concrete transactions. And the people we have met. Enlil Nasir struggling to make a living from his boat, Nin Shubur weaving in the temple workshop, Kubao crafting tools in his workshop, Ea Nasir managing his trading ventures, Kubatum running her tavern. These are the real economy, the human beings whose labor and enterprise and exchange create the wealth that supports civilization. As we conclude this journey, let us return one final time to the marketplace as a new day begins. The sun is rising over light flooding across the mud-brick city, the great ziggurat casting its shadow across the streets. At the quay, new boats are arriving with their cargoes. In the marketplace, sellers are setting up their goods. In workshops throughout the city, craftsmen are beginning their day's work. Enlil Nasir is preparing his boat for another voyage, perhaps to the marshes for fish, perhaps upriver with passengers or cargo. Nin Shubur is walking to the temple workshop, where she will spend another day at the loom, fingers flying through familiar motions, creating cloth thread by thread. Ku Bao is lighting his furnace, preparing to work on a new order, teaching his apprentices, practicing the craft his ancestors practiced before him. Ea Nasir is reviewing his accounts, planning his next venture, managing the complex web of relationships and transactions that constitute his business. Kubatum is preparing her tavern for the evening, buying supplies at the market, organizing her daughters, maintaining the establishment that supports her family. The cycle continues, has continued for centuries, will continue for centuries more, until finally declines, other cities rise, Sumerian civilization gives way to Akkadian, and then Babylonian and Assyrian, and eventually the whole world of ancient Mesopotamia fades into history, leaving only ruins and clay tablets to tell us of their lives. But in 2400 BCE, is vital, prosperous, confident. Its markets are busy, its trade networks extend across the known world, its people make their livings through countless daily transactions that together constitute an economy, that create the surplus that supports temples and palaces, that makes possible the art and literature and learning we associate with civilization. The markets of ancient Mesopotamia are not so different from markets today. People still need to eat and clothe themselves, still make things and trade them, still calculate advantage and manage risk, still form the social bonds that make commerce possible. The tools and technologies have changed, the scale is vastly larger, the complexity is far greater, but the fundamental patterns remain: specialization and exchange, production and consumption, cooperation and competition, the endless human effort to make a living and perhaps prosper in a world that offers both opportunity and danger. And so the day begins in as it has begun for generations, as it will begin for generations to come. The ancient rhythms of market and trade, of work and exchange, of human beings doing what they have always done, trying to survive, to provide for their families, to find meaning and community in the daily round of labor and commerce that is life in the city.